the Instructor podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.
Welcome to the Instructor podcast Green Room edition. This is the podcast that doesn't normally watch the one show, but recently made an exception. As always, I am your mediocre host, Terry Cook. I'm delighted to be here, but you'll be delighted it's not just me, because I am joined by a big, sexy Chris Spencer. How are we doing, Chris?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm recovering from a cold still. My throat's still a bit croaky, so I'll apologise if I sound huskier than normal.
That's always a good thing, but I just realised when I said that, then there'll be people listening now that won't get the context behind the nicknames I give you, and it's just like tough luck. They'll have to deal with it. But yeah, I did kind of mention there the one show because we are going to be talking about that today because, you know, there was a BBC expose about a driving school, and we're going to touch on that a little bit later on, not recently, a little bit later on. But this is the show we cover all the latest news and hot topics for this industry, and we've got some massive kind of breaking news to start off with, Chris. I think it's the biggest news of the year. Are you ready? Are you braced?
I'm braced.
The Instructor podcast Green Room is going to be going live on YouTube starting from November. Go straight to the tube so people can watch us as we record it. Chris, how do you feel about that?
Absolutely petrified because it's proper live and immediately live, and that means that not that we ever edit things, but there's no opportunity to regret at that point until it's too late.
Well, I mean, that's kind of part of the reason why I put it onto YouTube, because this show it's intended to be very different to the Instructor podcast. It's a different feel. The Instructor podcast episodes are produced quite heavily. That makes it sound professional. They're edited, but no, they are produced quite heavily. It is professional. I don't want to do myself down. Whereas this one is, I always want it to have the feel of it recorded live. And that's what it is. But there is the opportunity to edit. And there have been times when I've gone, Terry, don't say that. And then I've gone back and taken it out. But yeah, it's going to be going live on YouTube because it's the evolution of this green room, I think. So, I mean, one thing I will say just quickly, because there will be people out there that listen, the podcast version specifically, it will still go out as a podcast. So it'll be broadcast live on YouTube for anyone to watch. It'll be available for the public to watch and comment on YouTube and all that kind of stuff. But it will then go out as a normal podcast into the Instructor podcast feed as well. So if you want to listen, you can do. And the other thing I just want to say here is that at the minute we record it in front of premium members. Sometimes we get no one come along, sometimes we get half a dozen that come along and watch us blabber on for a bit. So I feel a little bit like we're taking something away from them, but we're not. Because what we're going to do is when we finish recording live on YouTube or streaming live on YouTube, we're going to do I think I'm going to call an after show party, although probably not, but an after show party into the Instructor podcast premium. So I think everyone's getting something extra there, Chris.
Sounds good to me.
I'm really looking forward to it. Highly nervous because it's technology and there's a chance it go wrong and we'll just go back to it as normal. But what's the worst could happen? And the last thing I would say actually is that it's one of those things where I don't think anyone else in the industry is going live on YouTube at the minute. I could be wrong completely, but I've not seen anyone. So no one else is doing it. Let's do it. But bit more news because the Instructor podcast is back. So this will go out public recording on the 31st of October, which is Halloween. So happy Halloween, everyone. We've done it on the last day of the month for the last few years now. But that means that the podcast, season 9 of the podcast, has been out for a few days. So I can't ask you what you think of it, Chris, because you won't listen because it's not out yet. But by the time people are listening to this, it will be. So make sure you are subscribed to everything and enjoying that as well. But in other news, I want to talk a little bit about graduated driving licensing. Now, before everyone turns off, I want to talk specifically almost a little bit about the problem with it, because the RAC recently released their official proposal for graduated driving licensing. And then shortly after that, the AA have released their proposal for graduated driving licensing. And they're very similar, but they're not the same. And I think that's part of the problem. So before we just take a look at the proposal specifically, I'm going to focus on the RAC one. But before we take a look at that specifically, Chris, do you think this is part of the problem with not just the road safety sector, but lots of sectors, including ours, that people aren't necessarily working together, because to me, that would have been the perfect time for the RAC Foundation and the AA to get together and go, can we combine something here?
Possibly, but equally, it could be that by getting it out there and having difference, we then have conversation about it. So, politicians don't like being told what to do. So by giving them choices and options, and they could pick favourites, or they can, come up with their own idea, although it's based firmly on the pillars of others, that maybe that gets change happening. So I don't know if it is a negative. It'd be nice if everyone could kind of work together, and, I think to do that, we have to have an opinion. So, yeah, I get it. There's an opportunity there to kind of, come together, and maybe that's a follow-on thing. Maybe there is an opportunity then to go, well, we've said this, you've said this. Here's where we agree. There's a starting point. So it depends what happens next. We've been doing this long enough to know that nothing happens next in a lot of cases, or empty, hollow promises happen next, and nothing comes from there. I've learnt not to hold my breath. However, graduated driving licensing, is the way forwards in some way. It's figuring out what that is, and at that point, if they've got to agree, so have we. Both you and I are not good at that.
One of the things I did like about it, actually, because we had Dr. Liz Box on the BBC talking about it, and maybe this is the positive side, actually, because then we had Edmund King, who's the chair of the AA, on the ITV talking about it. So the two big national kind of broadcast channels, BBC and ITV, both had representatives of each on. Maybe if they'd have kind of joined forces, we wouldn't have got that. But I do want to look at just a couple of bits around them, and specifically RAC's ones. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. So they basically made 3 key points, which is that there will be a 6-month learning period. We can touch more on that in more detail because that's very ambiguous. Then there will be 6 months after qualifying where you are not allowed peer age passengers in the car. If you break that rule, you'll get 6 points on your license, which will then mean you obviously need to, get disqualified and retake your test. So those are the only 3 points on the RAC's one. And it will only apply to 17 to 19-year-olds. It won't go 20 or above. So if you pass your test 2 weeks before your 20th birthday, that graduated driving license would only apply for 2 weeks. So just on those points, Chris, what are your thoughts?
Well, that's good, because most people can't get a test inside of that time scale anyway. So anyway, sorry, I couldn't resist. No, I think they're good, substantiated, evidenced points that we've seen in other countries. We've seen the support for them. I'm not surprised. They're the things that you would put on the table. The response to most is going to be, we can't stop people doing this, or it's going to inconvenience people, and there's going to be exceptions. Yes, there will be. But if it makes things safer in the way that it should, then absolutely. I'd rather have more of a focus on education in there. That's the bit I think is missing. We've got experience and we've got age, and we know that those are the weighted things from a scientific point of view. They're the things that are proven. But I think that's because education hasn't really had the opportunity to prove itself. So I think, I'd like to see a bit more of education in there.
I think on both parts are looking at experience over education. And I think it's interesting that they've kept it as simple as possible. And the thing is, right, what the big thing they're saying, because I spoke to Liz Box about this, you can actually, I grilled her a bit about it, actually. It's coming out on the Driving Instructors Division Zero podcast on the 1st of November, because it was the 6-month training period. Like, what does that mean? Is there going to be any mandatory aspects of training with a professional, or will it just be with mum and dad? Do they have to train for 6 months, or could you do something at the first week and then not do anything for 3 months, then catch up then? And there's this massive grey area that she kind of struggled to answer. And I think the reason they struggled to answer that, I think there's 2 reasons. One is there isn't a good answer at the minute. The second is, and it's kind of touched on what you said, this needs to go to government, needs to go to Parliament, which will be debated and it'll be changed. So the big thing they're doing is saying, let's get this really simple, basic one in front of Parliament. We'll get this out, and then they can add stuff on. Then they can change it or amend it as we go. But this is the best opportunity to get something like this in rather than adding all these 7, 8, 9 different layers.
Yeah, I think, it's one step at a time, isn't it? Getting it out there. We haven't had these proposals in this format before. It's been spoken about. I've sat in loads of rooms talking about it. Mainly, the biggest issue we used to have was no one knew what graduated driving licensing was. They couldn't agree on what it was, so it got the baby thrown out with the bathwater. I think from an driving instructor's perspective, we should probably be more on the side of the RAC proposals. I think they're probably more in line with us being a benefit from what I've seen of the differences. And again, we need to know more. But they're slightly more in favour of the training side of things, the logbook side of things, where if it goes in our favour, and there's always you open that bottle, you never know what's going to come out. I think they'd probably be more in keeping with what we would be looking for as businesses that deliver driver training. And my only other thing is a total throwaway, but it jumped out at me as a thought, was I'm not convinced that G plates are a good idea because of the young person's interpretation of being a G is would probably make them out to be the opposite of what they're trying to achieve in some ways. And so often we're driven by culture. So I just wonder, just to have thrown it out there and, at least have it on record so that I can refer back to it and say, well, I did say that. Yeah, I'm not quite convinced of the choice of G plate. Yeah.
I mean, just for anyone listening that won't know, the G plate has been put forward by the AA as a replacement of an L plate, if you like, that you need on for 6 months after you passed.
Well, it's a formal version of the P plate, which
Yeah.
was always a watered down, have it to make yourself feel better.
I don't think that's in the RAC proposal. I could be wrong on that, but I don't think it's, and I think it's in the AA's. And yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of that. I don't know. This is one I've been pondering a lot about because I've always pondered P plates, and I don't think there's a definitive yes or no to them. I think it's either way. I mean, Guy McMillan's in the comments says P plates already make new drivers around Leicester a target for the local idiots. And I get it, but do they? I think this is a genuine thing. How do we know that? I'm not picking on Guy for this because that used to be in my trailer thought. I'm like, well, how do I know that? Is that just me thinking if I was a knobhead, that's what I would do?
But it makes you stand out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's like absolutely everything. If you have an identifying factor, then it gives the opportunity for you to be targeted because of it. Whether that be, race, religion, politics, whatever it is, if there's someone that takes a dislike to it, and the problem is that if you've got someone who is lacking in skills because of lack of experience or whatever it might be, that's putting them at risk. I've always said to people, if you insist on P plates, because I'm on record as not being a fan, stick one on the back, don't stick it on the front. Because then at least if something goes wrong, the people behind you will know why, and that'll make you feel better. But you won't have people driving at you in quite the same way.
I think the last thing I want to touch on this, unless there's anything you want to add, is you mentioned it before about the policing of it. There's a lot of arguments against graduated driver licensing, and I think a lot of them are valid arguments. However, the policing of it isn't one of them for me, and I really believe this. I think that just doesn't hold up because if you're going to say that something's difficult to police or who's going to police it, then we might as well legalize burglary because it's hard to police. So therefore, let's just legalize it. Then it's not a problem. The way it would be policed is twofold. So first of all, you would have the parents that would be policed in the same way parents police their kids now. Not all of them, not everyone brilliantly, not everyone perfectly, but if parents knew that 6 months after passing your test when you're 17 years old, you are not allowed, your mates in the car, the parents would enforce that in the same way the parents would likely enforce their kids to stop them stealing. So that is one aspect, but also the same way the police enforce stuff now. And I think this is maybe this is actually the one good thing about a G plate. If you had a G plate on there and the police car behind sees there's two young lads in it, well, they know there's something wrong there because there shouldn't be two young lads in that car.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from, and I need to say this because people don't realise it, apart from the exemptions, there are exemptions that can be made in certain circumstances for graduated driving licenses. So I just want to throw that out there. Anything you want to touch on before we move on, Chris?
Yeah, and I don't know because I haven't seen it, but there's always the family argument as well, isn't there? That if it was there's situations when when you can have that set up that would potentially otherwise not be allowed. It's a bit like the smoking law, which always makes me laugh. The 17-year-old driver can smoke all they like with 18-year-olds in the car, but the 18-year-olds aren't allowed to smoke because there's a 17-year-old driving. And you get those; they're gonna happen. Driving instructors are gonna have a field day because they love it. They love an exception. But there's a roundabout near my house that doesn't work at. So yeah, with all of that, it's I think there's going to be those things. There's going to be the reasons not to, but actually, the thing about the policing is, I think burglary is a really good thing. We need to lock our own front doors. That's where we start, and then we need to look after each other. So neighborhood watch, if you like, and by having those rules there, we feel more judged. We feel more protected, and therefore it should work. And I'm all for it. I just am always hesitant when we start saying set number of hours or set amount of time or those kind of things that sometimes we wish for it and then we regret it later.
Chris Spencer quote, "I think burglary is a really good thing." I'm very much looking forward to going live on YouTube. Let's move on then. Let's take a moment to set the table. Chris, do you want to take a moment to tell everyone who you are and what you offer?
So I'm driving instructor without a car because I am the theory specialist and I can help with all things theory on pretty much any license. I was helping someone with motorbikes the other day. I don't have a motorbike license, but I know lots about it now. The theory test is the theory test. And I am the co-founder of the DITC, the Driving Instructor and Trainers Collective, theditc.co.uk, which is where you head if you have a driving instructor question or need, and we can help sort that out and point you in the right direction.
Excellent. And you are listening to the Instructor Podcast Green Room Edition. And to find out more from anything I do, head to the website, www.theinstructorpodcast.com. Over there, you can find the entire back catalogue of episodes we've got, which is an absolute ton of free resources, an absolute goldmine of knowledge and inspiration and wisdom in there. And then you'll find also further details on the membership, which starts at £10 a month, and there's 2 tiers to that. And there's a whole host of content and heap information and gold dust and stuff over there as well, including today, as we're recording, we released a brand new episode of Andy McFarlane of Bright Coaching, and we were talking about getting back to basics and making sure that we are actually teaching the basics on lessons and not pushing ahead too quickly. Really interesting conversation with Andy there, and that starts at, get a week's free trial to go and see if you like it or not. You can find all that at www.theinstructorpodcast.com. But there was a bit more news this month, Chris, because I kind of touched on it earlier in a jokey way, which is that the One Show did do a bit of an expose on specific driving school. And I was debating whether to name the school, but it's on the BBC. So that's going to be more public than me. So whatever, it was a 5-day driving school, I think it's called. And yeah, basically what they found out was that, try to be polite, they were misrepresenting things in that they were saying, they gave the impression that learners could book with them, do a week's course and have the test at the end. Then when it came to that week, they would find out A, they didn't have a test, and B, there was often not, maybe I shouldn't say often, in the examples provided by the BBC, often not an instructor available. And then there were other bits and bobs as well around website images being incorrect, and they're using different past pictures from other instructors on their website and all that kind of stuff. And I'll be honest, I did debate for a long time whether to actually discuss this in here, because one thing I'm not a fan of is public shaming. And I do not want this, and I'm sure you wouldn't take it this way, Chris, but I'm saying, why can't I talk? Chris, I'm sure you wouldn't take it this way, but for anyone listening, I'm clarifying, I don't want it to be a public shaming session. I wouldn't want that done to me, and I wouldn't want it done to anyone else. But I think it's important to highlight the dangers of running your own driving school and not running it effectively and not behaving in a professional manner. So I think I'm just going to start off by throwing to you for your thoughts on this, Chris.
I think that's the really important point. And I also think that as fellow business people, we should all remember every time that there is a person behind the company, because I think that gets forgotten as well. So, I always think that's something I try to remember, but we need to be responsible for our own choices. And, it is, I thought it was fascinating that they use reverse image searches to track back to where the past pictures had come from and such. They clearly did a bit of journalism on it. The problem is it gets turned into, pop culture TV, and it depends on how they choose to represent things. So we don't know, but talking broader, rather than talking about that company, intensive providers have been doing exactly what they've described for ages. We've all dealt with it. I had 2 text messages today going, "We've got a pupil, can you help?" And another one which was an instructor who's trying to help his friend who's done an intensive course, didn't leave the village, thought that by the end of it they were going to be sorted, end of a 5-day course, and can't drive, didn't have a test at the end of it anyway. Instructor turned up. So, those are it's not exclusive to that company and, that situation. I felt a little bit sorry for them, to be honest, because they were the one that got singled out, and we could have probably given them between us another 20 names of companies that are probably just as bad, or, in potentially different ways as those things that they highlighted. So, yeah, I will just clarify my position. Not a fan of intensives unless they're being used as kind of cram revision once you've done the learning. For all those reasons we've just mentioned on graduated driving licensing, I think they go absolutely against it. I have no love loss for them at all. I feel sorry for people that I believe misled into thinking that there's something there's a way of doing it. And I would also say that's not just learners. People who are becoming driving instructors fall into the same trap of being sold a week-long course and told, yeah, go on, we'll teach you to be a driving instructor inside of that time as well.
I'm not a big fan of intensive courses. I think for all the reasons you've described, I think the one that's always bothered me is the GDL aspect, the learning time period. It's like, I'm sure you've had this, Chris. I'm sure every instructor listening's had this, where students come back to them after a lesson and said, "Oh, I was on bus this week and this thing happened. Or I was in this car and this thing happened." Well, if you're doing a intensive course, you're taking away that opportunity. If someone learns over 3, 4, 5, 6 months, they've got all the opportunity as a passenger of a taxi, of a passenger of a car, as a passenger of a bus, to see these situations, and that helps them become thinking drivers. Because as we all hopefully are starting to realise, it's not just about being able to move a steering wheel or clutch control. And Guy said early on in the comments that, this 6-month learning period would be the end of intensive courses. And potentially, I think they would have to change, because I've done one. I provided one intensive thing in the past, but it was very different. And it was at the students' request. And they came to me and they said, can we do 30 hours across a week and then one lesson every week up to my test, which is about 3 months away? And I thought, yeah, that sounds fun. Hated it. I got to day 2 and I was done. I'm like, I don't want to see this person ever again. That's not a slight on them. That's a slight on me. I can't spend time with people. But it was a novel idea, doing that big block first and then rolling it on. So there would be ways around it in that sense. But even that's giving that time period, that learning experience in between the lessons, isn't it?
Yeah. And I've done one where I split it with another instructor. I did the mornings, he did the afternoons. We did 2 hours each. We did that across a 2-week period. And for that pupil, awesome. It really worked. And I'm still in touch with him. I hear from him. He's brilliant at referring people to us because we didn't say no. We said, well, how can we make it work? It was one of those. And still in touch, still refers people across. And he's the one that tells them don't do intensive. But he had a work requirement for it, and we managed to accommodate. And it worked for him. He was an exception, in my opinion. And would I do it again if the same thing came up? Probably not. It was one of those where I kind of felt, he's going to do it anyway. I'd rather he did it with someone where an instructor does turn up and where there is a test at the end and everything else. It was very much based around that. Doing it with another instructor was really interesting, and I think that's another aspect that we tend to be a single instructor to a single pupil, and actually mixing it up a bit was interesting. So, not all bad things come out of these things, but it is misleading, isn't it? Misleading is a really fair word because they would always say in the small print, you're not guaranteed. We might tell you you're not ready, but it makes it sound like that's the exception and not the rule. And I know I've had conversations with some companies where you're almost encouraged as an instructor to take them on because you can pull the plug at the end, that it's in the terms and conditions and it's all right, go and teach them for the week and then go, you're not ready. And you need another however many weeks or whatever it is because we haven't got a test anyway. And it's not the nice face of the industry. It doesn't work for me.
No, and that idea is, I don't know, it doesn't sit well with me. That obviously you need to have it there, that you can, say at the end you can't do it. But like you said, it's almost sold on that sometimes. Oh, don't worry if they're not ready, don't have to do it. I'm like, yeah, but that shouldn't be the goal. And it feels like that, like you say, like they make it the goal. But I think lifting up and looking from a higher viewpoint from this, we very, very rarely see anything positive about driving instructors by anyone else. We see the stuff that we might talk about. We see, driving instructor day, March. I forgot what day driving instructor day is. It's a date in March. It's about the 20th, isn't it? Something like that. And I'm thinking back to the last driving instructor day where there were other companies that were starting to shout in a positive way about driving instructors, but we rarely see it. But we do see this sort of stuff. It wasn't that long ago, Theresa May was still in Parliament talking about how, they need to do more checks on driving instructors because they're all, inappropriate with the students. She phrased it better than I did. So I don't think the public, and I think we all know this, the public generally doesn't have the best perception of driving instructors. Do you think this makes it worse? Do we all get tarred with the same brush potentially?
Normally, I'd say yes. They didn't phrase it as driving instructors that were the issue. I think actually, on this occasion, oh, it's catching. It's been a long month, hasn't it? This is the thing. It's getting dark out there. So on this occasion, I think actually instructors weren't the target of the article. It was a company providing a service without driving instructors that we were almost victim of as well because, we were being victim of in the case that they reported because they phoned driving instructors, said that they were phoning from Watchdog and said, your photo's being used. Do you know anything about it? I'd blooming say no as well. So, I wonder how accurate that is, especially when these companies farm out work. You might not realize you're doing it for that company. You're just taking on a pupil that's being offered. So that bit just I wasn't sure about. But I think as instructors, we actually escaped fairly unscathed, probably benefited in the long run, and so did road safety. So I feel sorry for James because he's was the one that didn't on this occasion.
I think I half agree with what you're saying. I agree in this prospect of road safety's benefited by this now coming out. And as you said, 5-day have come out and said they are making changes as a result of this, which is definitely a good thing. So that's going to be a good thing. And I think that some instructors will benefit as a direct consequence of this. But I do still think there's a lot of people out there that won't see it that way, that watch that program and go, oh, bloody driving instructors, my one cancelled the other day, he must be in on this game as well. And we run that risk, we see it all the time when someone commits a crime and they've got a certain characteristic that gets reported, and all of a sudden, all those people with that characteristic are all a criminal. And, I think that comes up. But I want to talk a bit more about professionalism specifically. In a little while ago, when I released my batch of episodes with Laura Morris, I spoke about it in quite a bit there. Really good episode. Go back and check it out. But I'm intrigued for you, from your perspective, Chris. You work with a lot of instructors in a lot of different capacities. Where do you see some of the big areas that driving instructors lack professionalism?
It's sadly quite a long list. So as the DITC, I'm often the one that gets phone calls when instructors have got points on their license. The big one is the one that comes up the most, because it's 6 points, is touching a mobile phone. And just to be clear, because it's amazing how many people don't realize specifically what it is. It can be in a holder. Putting your finger on that phone is now an illegal act, and it's 6 points on your license. And we're getting a lot of police officers standing by traffic lights and knocking on the window saying, right, pull over. So, I think that is blatant, and they all regret it. They've all justified it because they feel that they're doing it safely. They're sat at traffic light, right? And I do get it. Absolutely. And, I deal with all of those calls without any judgment, because that's not what I'm there for. I'm there to help them understand what the process is and where they're at. Are they going to lose their livelihood? 6 points is enough for them to take you off the register. So 5 or more is when they start looking at it. So you've got those things. Then
let me just touch on that first, because I think that's a really interesting one to start with, because I think it was last year I wrote an article for Good Motoring magazine. It was titled, "How do you choose which law to break?" Because if it's okay to break one, then if it's okay for you to break a law about touching your phone because you disagree with that law, then it's okay for me to punch you in the face because I disagree with that law.
Yes.
You can't pick and choose. If you've got a problem with a law, you either need to do something about it, which would be taking it up with your local councillor, parliamentarian, whatever it is, and actually start campaigning against that law, or move to somewhere where there's not that law, when that law doesn't apply. There's probably other rules as well. I like to go to extremes, you know that, but it's, how do you choose which law you break?
But I think you do, don't you? I think there's this thing of, why is the law there? Because driving a car while using a mobile phone is proven to be dangerous. If I am parked at the side of the road on a cold day, is it okay for me to have the engine running while I'm on my phone? Because the law says it's not. If I am on a on a phone call and I'm going to get out of the car, some cars, the engine will be running. If you turn the engine off, it might kill the phone. Those technicalities are there. So it ends up being a bit grey. It doesn't change the law. And that's the problem, isn't it? Is our perception is what's different.
It's not grey, though. That's the thing. Like you say, it doesn't change the law. The law is black and white. You can't touch that phone. The issue is, are we choosing to break that law or not? And if you choose to break that law, you cannot then complain about the consequences.
To look at it something else in our world, stop signs. So would you let your pupil break the law? Because if you let them run a stop sign without a full stop, then they have. Now, it gets really difficult. I have a massive issue with stop signs, and I 100% know why they're there, and I support that. I recognise the need for it. But there's that rolling stop where, do you know what? They're safer than if they'd actually stopped and not looked. Because what they've really, really, really crept in. I'm like, as any slower they'd have stopped, we've all seen it. We've all had tests fail for it. Doesn't it get just, it grates a little bit. Surely some laws are more solid than others.
I mean, look, I'm not saying that I agree with the laws here. Let's just to clarify, because I'm sure there's some laws I disagree with. But what I'm saying is, we know what the laws are. Now, if you don't know that law, you do now. If you don't know that law, you do it, then that's a slightly different scenario. But it's that idea of how do we choose? So like you just said about the stop sign. Yeah, probably. I probably have allowed a student not dangerously, but to almost stop. Like you said, the rolling stop.
Yeah.
And is that breaking the law? Well, yes. So I've allowed that student to break the law. So therefore, I have chosen that.
You've also broken the law.
Yeah,
You've permitted them to do so, which is a law in itself.
But that's what I'm saying. We're choosing that. So if there'd have been a police car behind me, and I'd like to think I'd have seen him, but if there'd been a police car behind me, then I could have, or they could have been in problems for that. Probably not. They wouldn't have realised. You get my point. So it's just a really kind of, it's just how do you choose which law to break? And then when you choose to break that law, well, unfortunately, the consequences are yours.
Yeah. And going back to professionalism as well, if you don't know that law has changed, I'd judge you more for that than choosing to break it in a way. I think as an instructor, you should know that I've still, got this feeling yet to be proven that there's instructors that don't know about the H1 changes and, giving way to pedestrians when you turn into side roads. I'm sure that there's still some out there hiding in a cave somewhere. Now, some of that is about how we broadcast and shout about things, but they need to be listening on the other end, as we know. Telling them doesn't work. It's got to be a two-way process. And, linking it back to professionalism rather than legality, I would definitely judge those instructors more in that way. I say that as someone who is more than happy to go, fair enough, you don't know, let's educate you. I'm all about that. But you should know. You should be aware of those things and you should be engaging from, my personal belief structure about what it is to be professional.
I think I agree. I think the issue I've got is I try not to be judgy. And it's really difficult because I'm human, I can't help it. But with this sort of stuff, I do look, I think everyone's on a different chapter. There'd have been a period admittedly when I first started, but there'd been a period where I first started where I wouldn't have picked up on that because I wasn't in the circles, I wasn't listening, I wasn't trying. And that's on me. I'd hold my hands up and say that. But everyone's on a different chapter and I think there's times where we go, all right, that person's not on this chapter yet. Yes, I'm going to judge that, but I'm not going to judge it overly harshly because people make mistakes and people are human.
But you say it's on you, and I agree to that point. But I'm assuming that means your trainer told you these things and you chose to ignore them. They told you where to find the information. They told you about associations. They told you about the opportunities that are out there. There's way more than when we qualified, including the ones we've created ourselves because they weren't bloody there in the first place. So, no, they didn't. And it's still going on. Most trainers are not informing their trainees about where to find more information. And in a lot of cases, because it's going to put them out of a job potentially, it's all for those reasons. And franchises won't educate their franchisees because if we let them know about the real world, there can be an issue. Professionalism needs to be across the board, doesn't it? It's not just an individual thing. And this is where potentially, articles like the one on Watchdog damage us all on a professional level. And we should all care about that. But we're not police officers. So should we then go round to use the colloquial, grassing everybody up? If you see a driving instructor without a badge in their window, should you take a photo and send it to the DVSA?
Or if they've got an air freshener on the mirror.
Yeah, don't you dare. Smash the wind. No, don't. It's
live on YouTube. But I agree, and I don't want to go too much further down this rabbit hole. I just think it's interesting, that idea of how do we choose which law to break. And then when we choose that, we have to be aware of, right, well, I have to be ready to deal with the consequences now. So I just think it's interesting. It's that, like you say, with the mobile phone or the stop sign or the air freshener, it's like weighing up the pros and cons. Is changing my Spotify playlist while I'm parked up at the lights, is it actually worth it? Or is it worth me setting off 5 minutes earlier so I can pull over if I need to? Is that air freshener there worth? I mean, you're not going to get pulled for it. Like you said, you see people go on test for it, but is it worth it? And for some people it is. They make the choice. But then, right, too far. Going off too far off track now. Let's bring it back to professionalism. So that's the first one you mentioned, Chris, the idea of like punching a license, breaking the law, that aspect. What other areas of professionalism are driving instructors weak at? Not all, just to clarify.
Just
Not
no, just as an industry, which things do we? I think CPD we're getting better at. Whatever is CPD to you, I don't really care as long as you're looking to improve your skills. Because if you're not, you're missing out. I just think that side of things. The other one is the other one that DVSA get all the complaints about, which is customer service. You don't have to be nice to everybody, but you be professional to them. It's the Terry Cook "don't be a dick" thing. Basically that's all the DVSA expect, and that doesn't include. They will support you if you're saying you're not ready for test. They've said that categorically on record. Be careful, it might change next week because that happens sometimes with DVSA because they've said other things on record as well. But at the moment, they are supporting us. If we say you're not ready, that's not good enough. For a complaint, that won't hold water. They support your professionalism. So when you say to them you're not ready, do it professionally. Don't do it the day before a test, unless you really have to, and then do it. That's fine. But don't build them up and say, oh, it's fine, I'll get you ready in a week, and then at the end of it pull the plug. If there are ways to prevent it, put in measures along the way to help judge. Make use of digital systems that can help you track better, because as we get more data for pupils and development, we'll be able to develop better ways of identifying the successful ones. By working together and working with these kind of approaches, we will all be more professional because we'll be better at the job. And then just because it's okay to swear doesn't mean you should swear at them. I have no issue with swearing, but very rarely have I sworn at a pupil, unless they're a sweary pupil. I've had a couple of builders that if I didn't swear, they wouldn't have listened. Engage on their level, but don't swear at them. There's no need. And say, just thinking about your text message, some of the ones I see on Facebook, I genuinely cringe. And you just think, well, if you hadn't written that, you could have turned that around. You've created the problem. Now live with it. So I think those kind of things, they're important. Just a bit of decency and understanding inside of what we do.
Do you think there's a stubbornness almost sometimes around this stuff? Like, no, admittedly, this doesn't happen to me often, but when it does, I do find it annoying. So I will own up to this before I start. But when someone texts you and you don't reply, and then you get a text 10 minutes later that's a question mark, it's like, I see some instructors on Facebook having an absolute meltdown over that. And I think, just to reply, it's not the end of the world. What they've done is followed up. Now, whether they've done it in the most polite way or not, it's almost irrelevant. You could have a chat with them. You don't have to have a meltdown over it. Like I say, it does narc me. Again, rarely happens, admittedly, but when it's like, that's annoying. But I can either throw a tantrum and go and post about it on Facebook, or I can reply.
Yes. I like they won't leave a message, but they'll phone you 3 times in quick succession because clearly you deliberately ignored them the first time.
Oh, I do. I do not answer the phone. I am that age. I'm a 90s kid, right? Phone doesn't get answered. You ring me, I'll text you and ask what you want.
So, it's those things, but it's how you do it. I've started to, it's a while back now, but I will regularly say to people, I'm really bad at, and just to clarify, not in a car, right? During a lesson, something pops up on my screen, I'll kind of flick it and then flick it off. If we're busy doing something, the pupil's busy working on something, and I'll just quick glance in case it's the next pupil cancelling or whatever it might be, and then I know where I'm at. Not in a car, okay? But I don't forget that. So I actively say to people, I have no issue with you chasing me up. If you think I've missed your message, if you think that I've forgotten to get back to you, I'm going to take shared responsibility on that with you. Please do chase me up. I'm asking you to. And then when they do, I don't care because they're doing what I've asked. It doesn't bother me. They can send as many question marks as they like. That's fine. Because it's me that didn't get back to them. Bit of personal responsibility.
It's that stubbornness. And I don't know if stubborn's the right word, but that thing of this thing's annoyed me, therefore it's the end of the world. And, Guy McMillan's just made the comment here, teenagers talk a different language. And I hope this doesn't come across wrong. He's right, they do. But when I was a teenager, I spoke a different language to my parents, and I still speak a different language to them now. It's not, I don't think it's a teenage thing. I think it's a generational thing. We speak a different language to the people 20 years before us. So I go around and I'll see like my nephew who's 19. Yeah, 19 now. And he says stuff and I'm like, I haven't got a clue what you just asked me. Can you say it again in old person, please? And he texts Mick at me and we'll have like a joke back and forth. And that's what I'm like with my students. There are times I've got a message and I've sent back and said, yeah, say it again. And it's fun. And because we do speak a different language, so something that they could say to their friends that would be hilarious or make sense, they could send to me and I won't have a clue, or it might annoy me. Well, that's just a difference in language. And I've got two choices there. Now, they have the same choice. I can either get mad about it, throw a tantrum, go and post about it on Facebook, or I can adapt. And that adapting could be trying to work out what they're saying. It could be text them back, say, yeah, I don't know what that means. Say it again, please, an old person, or whatever, or anywhere in between. But it's that stubbornness, I think. And the other one I'll give an example of here, and I'm really, really interested in your thoughts on this. No-shows. Because I'm going to tell you what I do. And I want an honest dissection of how I handle no-shows, because I am a driving instructor with a car who still delivers lessons. I think you could just about almost consider me part-time now. I don't know, some weeks not. I have a chat with the students on that first lesson. We go through a couple little bit of policy bits and cancellation policy and whatnot. And I'll say if I turn up and you don't come out after, I'll say I'm usually early, 5 or 10 minutes early. I'll text you when I get there. If I'm not heard out just after starting time, I'll text you again. If I've not heard out at that 10 minutes past, I will text you again and I will go. That's my starting point. Now, what I clarify is, do you want me to come and knock on your door? And I usually do this before I even go in first lesson. When I get there, do you want me to come and knock on your door? Or do you want me to text you? I did it once and lived in a flat. I forgot to check beforehand. But either way, so I'll just text. Anyway, another story, another day. But I check first, do you want me to knock on your door? 99% of the time I say no. Then when I run through my policy, I say, if you're not there after 10 minutes, do you want me to knock on your door? Some of them say yes, some of them say no, and I make notes of that. So if someone says yeah, well, I'll go knock on their door. No problem. Someone says no, I won't. The other thing I do is I'll often stay there because I've got a shed load of work I can be doing, admin and stuff. And I think, do you know what? I'm just going to hang about. And I'll text them and they'll say, look, I know I haven't heard from you, but I'm probably going to be here till about 1:30. So if you come out, be fine. And there's a bit of me, and I saw this on someone else say this on social media once, and I admittedly don't do it. But I should. I believe that. Someone's paid for my time 2 hours, let's say 10 till 12. What does it matter if they come out at 10 or at 11:30? They're still paying for that time. I could sit there, listening to music, reading a book, doing some yoga outside a car, whatever, for that time period, and still get paid, regardless, irrespective, especially if they're paid in advance, because there's no issues there. So I realise I kind of spoke a lot there, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
So if you see Terry doing the downward dog at the side of the road, it's because he's had a no-show again.
Oh, it's usually in car park I do that. I've learnt not to do downward dog because your head's down and then you can't see the car coming into the bay. And that's
someone parks a bike.
It's what?
Someone parks a bike.
Yes.
So, yeah, you triggered me slightly with the whole front door thing, because the other day I was on Facebook saying, I would always go knock on the door to start with at least. But then you resolved it by saying that you would ask. So I'll let you off. Just go back to professionalism. I think, there's that thing. It also means that, especially if parents are paying, you can engage with them a bit and stuff like that. It's all, again, different people's values, isn't it? And a lot of the time, the values are irrelevant. It's the reasoning. It's the why. I've always ended up having a better relationship regarding no shows and more importantly charging for no shows or late cancellations, not just not turning up, but the late cancellations. I've had a better relationship with the people where I do go and knock on the door and and then when there's a problem, they're dealing with a human being that they know rather than that driving instructor they've never met. I first lesson always or have always given them a freebie and said, you can use this when you choose to. You get one free cancellation. That's it. After that, you're being charged for everything. I work on a fair use policy. I will always try and be reasonable, but you get one free cancellation. And the funniest thing is when they go, I don't want to use my cancellation. I'm going to pay for this one because I might need it next month and I might not have the money. And they genuinely value it. And like everything, if we both know, or if someone else is paying for the lessons, all of us know, all the relevant parties, we know the rules, we understand them, we agree to them, then everything tends to go okay. So, when you don't know them, when it's not, you haven't made it clear, that's when it comes and bites you. And that's a massive part of professionalism. Written terms and conditions, and in my business opinion, they have to be signed. And I know that lots of instructors won't ever have had them written. It's always verbal. It's all good. They've never had a problem in the 100 years that they've been a driving instructor. I don't care, because that one occasion when it is a problem, mine are signed. Mine will stand up in court. Not an issue. Yours won't. So on that one occasion when you phone the DITC and you've never had some signed terms and conditions, but you've, criticised me for suggesting you should, that one occasion I might kind of have to swallow a little bit hard before I try and be supportive. But that, for me, just making sure that we're doing things in a really open way where everyone knows what's what, and we've dotted the I's, crossed the T's. That's it.
That's the key thing, and it almost doesn't matter what your rules are as long as the student's aware of them.
Yeah.
I want to just talk a little bit about social media and professionalism on social media, because I would potentially hazard a guess this is where driving instructors are at their least professional. And I'm going to give a specific example here because I saw one not so long ago that annoyed the bejesus out of me. And it was someone I respect.
What did I do? No, sorry, it's not me, is it?
No.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say, and it was someone I respect, or someone I respected. That respect has diminished massively.
Okay, mate.
Yeah. No, you've got to have it in the first place. No, it was a video, and I'm going to try not to go into too much detail because I don't want to drop anyone in it, but so I'll try and keep it generic. But essentially, they're in the passenger seat, learners in the driver's seat, driving along. Parked cars on the right, so the car coming towards them should have held back. The car coming towards them kind of forced away through. The learner's not slowed down on approach, and the instructor's not intervened at all until they've got there. And then I don't know if the instructor slammed on or whether the student then slammed on, but it was quite an aggressive stop. The instructor is then sort of gesticulating towards the other driver, not aggressively, but pointing at them whilst they're talking to the student and saying, they're in the wrong there, they should have given way to you. And I'm thinking, that would have been the absolute golden opportunity to say to that student, do you reckon they're going to give way? When you're that far from car, because the car probably didn't look like it was going to give way.
Yeah.
So do you reckon they're going to give way? Student goes, yeah or no, whatever. And then you respond accordingly. And what a great learning opportunity for that student to then go, oh, not everyone's going to give way to me. I'd best slow down just in case. Oh, they should have given way to me, but how easy did I make that? Instead, what they've got is they've been taught, I can drive up, slam on, and shout at that person for being it wrong. Now, I don't necessarily want to pinpoint that instructor, but it's just that sort of social media content where you've got the opportunity to show how things should be done, and this instructor fully knows how it should be done, or you've got the opportunity to go, ooh, let's get some views.
I'll throw into that mix the mock testers on particularly TikTok. One of which I was watching on at the weekend, and they were reading and answering questions off of the live feed while teaching, and they were they also touched the screen, doing it on a live feed. You know, I'm not saying that there's the same amount of illegal as we covered earlier, but it's the blatant nature of it. It's that lack of professionalism. And they then sat there on the live feed criticizing the previous instructor of this pupil for not being professional. Irony, absolutely. It was, and yes, exactly. You know, all of these things that are out there, it's bad enough it happens. The fact it's then out there on a video and it's a badge of honor and it's what you want to represent you. I don't have a professional persona that's separate to. You could cut that there. I've just realised it. So I don't have a professional persona that is separate to my private one, because my life's is sort of driving instructing, and my family get that. My other half is she probably knows more about being a driving instructor than most driving instructors. She definitely knows more names in the industry than anyone else. And you know, I've always struggled with that a little bit, because there's sometimes, you know, there's stuff that I would put out that I would find funny. Do I want that to represent me? It's all public. There's no such thing as a private profile. You criticize people for commenting. You put it out there yourself. You live by it, or don't put it out there, or lock up your world so other people can't access it. But I tell you what, they can still screenshot it. So don't be stupid. So I just think we're in a world where it's a little bit Black Mirror, isn't it? Where, you know, I remember seeing an episode where there was something in their eye that recorded everything, so you could then replay it for people. Be careful what you wish for. Be careful what you put out there. You know, just think about it, because we are not businesses in most cases. We are individuals, and how you do anything is how you do everything. So, you know, I think we need to really be careful.
I think it's one of those things where the example I used before, for instance, if that instructor didn't know better in that scenario, I kind of buy it, because that means it's just not the best instructor at this point, and they're on a different chapter and they're moving along or whatever. But they do know better. And just for anyone listening, it's not who you think it is. But they do know better, and they've just chosen to do it because it gets clicks and views. I think that's, like you were saying before, the idea of breaking the law and choosing to break the law rather than not knowing the law. Not knowing is worse. I think it's worse in this case, choosing to do it because you want clicks and views, because that's making the roads more unsafe, because people will follow that, assuming that's correct, because that will get more views than someone that shows how to do it properly. And I think that there is a level of professionalism with driving instructors. If you're putting something on social media, whether it's a video, whether it's audio content, whether it's written content or whatever on Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever, there should be an element of, I want to not bring down the standard of road safety. That should always be in there somewhere. Now, whether you put something out there that makes you look like a bit of a tit, which is what I regularly do, whether you put something out there that's maybe not quite right, or whether you put something out there that's, you try something and it doesn't come off or whatever, to me, that's all fine. It's when you do something knowing that it's wrong, because that will then make or potentially have an impact on people dying or being in collisions on the road. And that's not over dramatizing it. That's people following by example. That's what you do on roads. That's what, so I just think that's where we need to be careful. But it's anything else you want to, we could talk about professionalism all day. I did about 50, 60 minutes with Laura Morris. Anything else you want to touch on here, Chris?
Just one thing that kind of twists it slightly, reforms it slightly, is the fact that we are in a very minimum standards industry. That's the DVSA's remit, and that's what a lot of instructors choose to work to. And actually, maybe professionalism and maximum standards go hand in hand. And maybe, to use that example of, of social media, steering with one finger is okay for the driving test. Doesn't mean you should ever teach it to anybody ever. Just because it's acceptable doesn't mean that you should. It's the equivalent of driving inside or at the drink drive limit. You don't recommend that everybody has that couple of pints before they get in the car because you can, and just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think that is a mantra that is worth keeping to.
Ready to move on, and now you throw a grenade into it. Because this happens all the time. It happens with instructors, but I'm going to raise it with exactly what you've said. New student this week, come from another instructor. He's had 20 hours, I think, something like that. Towards the end of the lesson, it's a 2-hour session. His hands have slipped down wheel and they're at the bottom. And I thought, that's interesting. And I like to play a little game where I guess why they're doing it before I ask them. And I'm like, I wonder if he's tired because he said that he used to do hour lessons with his previous instructor and now it's 2 and he's just getting a bit tired at the end of this lesson. So, I asked him, I said, you notice your hands have slipped a bit there? He's like, oh, yeah. Okay, that's interesting. No response. Like, just said, yeah. How come? What? Is that a conscious thing that you put your hands there? Have you chose to? Or have you not really? Oh, no, I knew I was doing it. It says, I've seen on TikTok that it's okay to do it. I'm like, yeah, of course it's okay to do it. I won't fail the test, would I? He says, no, you won't. What's safer? Having your hands at the top of the wheel or at the bottom? And he went quiet and he goes, probably top. I went, yeah, okay. Why? And then we kind of spoke about it for a minute. And I didn't tell him anything. I just asked him. And this was one of the rare occasions where it worked perfectly first time. Because he just went, yeah, it'd be a bit stupid, really, wouldn't it? Just keep my hands at the bottom. And he gave and this is an example I use sometimes, but he gave the example of if you've got your left hand on gear stick and your right hand at the bottom of the wheel and you need to swerve right, you're a bit stuck. So it's rare stuff like that happens first time, and I've got to be in my bonnet about instructors using that, trainers using those examples of it working first time as well. But it just was, and it's just like that. That's all you need to do on those TikTok videos. You can talk about all the same stuff. You can get all the same clickbait headlines. You can do everything you want. Just tag on the end. But what's safer? And you kind of eliminate, well, it's still not the ideal thing, but you eliminate the whole thing. But you can't throw that grenade in, Chris, when I give you a last one. But there's a specific question I want to ask you. A really specific question that I'm not going to add an awful lot of context to, and I'm not going to allow myself to respond to. But just before we do that, nice little cliffhanger for you. Just before we do that, I want to talk about what's coming up in the industry, because we forgot to do it last month. So what's coming up in the industry or key moments, and yes, I am going to take this opportunity just to plug slightly my stuff, because on the 4th of November, we've got My Damn Time. Dan Hill is recording live in the Instructor Podcast Premium. On the 6th of November, Being Better with Bob. Bob is going live in the Instructor Podcast Premium. And on the 11th of November, we have another expert session, this time with Tom Stenson talking about gamification. So if you signed up to the Instructor Podcast Premium Interactive tier now, you would get My Damn Time, Being Better with Bob, and the expert session with Tom Stenson, plus all the other expert sessions, including 4 we've done with you, Chris. Did one around about some favorite Sanders check, your favourite topic. But that's just my stuff. In November, so November the 17th, that is Road Safety Week. That is run by Break. And then on the 6th of December, it's the DIA Conference. So that's what's coming up that I can see the best of in November and December. I've also just realised I forgot to put on the Road Safety GB conference on there, which I believe is in November. I don't have the dates to hand, but yeah, so some fun stuff coming up, Chris. Anything take your fancy off that?
Yes, I think I'll be at the DIA conference, which is at the British Motor Museum, which is just a nice day out anyway. You get to combine the two. You can go and look around. Although last time I didn't even see a single car, I don't think, because I end up chatting with people and not getting to look around. You've niggled me with the Brake Road Safety Week again, because every single year I struggle to find something meaningful to do with it, except for kind of shouting, the usual rhetoric. I'm trying to find not clever, just something interesting that to do with that. And having a number of hats means I have to come up with 3 ideas, rather than just one. So yeah. And if anyone's got ideas on that, let's start shouting about it now, rather than leave it to the 17th and suddenly go, oh, it's this week. Let's plan ahead.
What I will say with that is I did have something in the pipeline that I was started planning at the beginning of the year. I think a few people watching and yourself, Chris, will have been aware of it. But in the end, I decided not to do it because I hope this doesn't sound too cryptic, but I don't want to be specific. It's in November. and it didn't feel appropriate doing it this November. So instead, I'm going to probably do it in May next year alongside the Road Peace event. But, we don't have to do anything big for Road Safety Week. I think this is a thing. It's great when we do. It really is. It's awesome when we do it. And I think that, as you said, if people have good ideas that they can throw out there and do, whether they get shared with others or they just do it themselves, then that's awesome. But it's Road Safety Week. I mean, we need to do something. And in my driving school hat on, I will do the bare minimum because I'm juggling a lot of balls in a minute. But I can share the road safety posts every day, and just doing that gains more traction. It's easy to say, well, it won't make a difference. Well, if 40,000 people say it won't make a difference, then it's not gonna. But if 40,000 people say it might do, then it will. So yeah, I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole today, but I would just advise anyone. It's on 17th of November, runs for a week. Just get stuck in. And Guy makes a good point. As driving instructors, surely every week is Road Safety Week. Yes, it is, but this is a week where you've got the whole road safety sector behind it as well. So it's a really good opportunity to promote it. But yes, it should be every week for us. And I do just want to ask you, Chris, the 3 lives coming up in the Instructor Podcast Premium. My Dan time, that's Dan Hill. I believe we're talking about Christmas and planning for December this time round. Being Better with Bob, we are talking about full license holders, teaching full license holders, and there's some Q&A in there as well because it's Bob. And then we've got the expert session, gamification with Tom Stenson. I like to put you on the spot. Which one would you come to if you had the choice?
Easy. It's the gamification session because gamification is my bag. I love it. There's an article about gamification on the DITC website. And I love that stuff. And do you know what? Dan Hill would come along to that one as well because he loves it, and so would Bob. So I think we'd all be there because, that pushes all of our buttons. But they're all going to be great because they're all brilliant at what they do. So but I'll happily, I'll go along and listen to Tom.
I'll send you a link. It's on the 11th of November. You can come along to it. One thing I'm going to mention, even though it'll be too late, but I'm going to mention it anyway, is you have going up against the DVSA, Chris, on the, what day will it be, the 29th? 28th of October. You are doing a webinar to combat the DVSA's webinar on the top 10 reasons people fail a driving test.
The DVSA cancelled. This was the issue. So there were people wanting to go along to it, and it was saying it was oversubscribed. But I believe it's now been moved to next year because the person who was doing it's not available. I don't know if that is fake news or not, but it's the news I got. So I just said, well, the information's out there. It's on the website. It's on the Ready to Pass. It's everywhere. So let's just do it ourselves. We don't need them. It'll be a better session anyway, because what we'll do is we won't talk about the test all the time. We'll talk about how to avoid the problems rather than what the problems are. So, if anyone wants to come along, I think we've got 55 people
it's
already.
It's too late for people to come along.
Oh, yeah.
But
tell you what, though, I'll do it again.
Well, there you go.
Maybe.
Well, what I will say is it's a good reason to be following the Instructor Podcast WhatsApp channel because I shared that link out on there. So, but I was just keen as to why you were deciding to do this because I don't know. It was interesting, and now you've told me that because the DVSA have cancelled. So
also, you know what I'm like. It was a really good idea at the time, and I someone said about it. It was like, I can do that. I do that sometimes, and I normally regret it later, but it's all good. I've got a lovely presentation all set up ready. I'm sure that by the time people listen to this, if it was that bad, you'll have heard about it. Hopefully it was that good that you heard about it as well. And I don't know, I might do another one about the theory test or something. So if people are interested, it might become a regular thing. It's basically like ADI Walkback, that there's a good idea there somewhere. And I kind of go, let's have a go. Why not? Let's see.
As I said, make sure you're following the Instructor Podcast WhatsApp channel because that was up there within 10 minutes of me seeing it. Well, not even 2 minutes of me seeing it. But
very kind.
Do you know what? It's interesting what you're saying about having these ideas because you were one of the people actually that I had to delete messages this week. I sent 7 messages out to 7 different people and then delete them all 5 minutes. I'm like, no, I have not got time or capacity for this now. So apologies to those 7 people. But yes, I want to ask you one very specific question to finish on, Chris. because it's something that I've kind of brain dumped on you a little bit over the last month or so, a couple of times, but never really spoken to you about it properly or asked for your thoughts on it. I've just done a little brain dump. And I want to ask you this without any comeback. So unless you say something that is categorically incorrect or something like that, then I'm not going to come back on it. But I want to ask you a very specific question. The Instructor podcast, has it been a net positive or a net negative for the industry?
I can't see how it's been a negative. There's always things that you wish you'd done differently, or that, like the Newton's cradle, you could trace back. It's like the reverse image lookup that Watchdog used. You can work your way back, and you kind of you see the pebble in the pond and the ripples that come out. Is that ever bad? That's life, isn't it? So 100% net positive, and I'm not going to sit and blow smoke up your backside. I refuse, because we know that you deserve more acknowledgement and respect than you get for it, and you get a lot, but you deserve more. And I'm very grateful to have had you on my podcast.
I mean, look, I'm not going to
no comebacks
respond to that. I'm not going to come back to that, but I will add a tiny bit of clarity on for the people listening, which is that I'm of the mindset at the minute that it's potentially been a net negative. However, I also realise that I probably shouldn't be saying that when I've now got actual sponsors on the show. So I'm thinking I'll put a poll out, but it's probably not ideal if everyone says negative and they've got some sponsor looking at it going, hold on, what's this? But yeah. Maybe I'll do a poll in January. Net positive or net negative. Either way, no, I was interested in your thoughts, so thank you for answering that, honestly. But do you want to take a moment just to remind people where they can find you?
So the ditc.co.uk for anything industry related. Challenge us. We don't care what it is. We've got lots going on behind the scenes with some new approaches to things, which will be coming out really soon, and we'll have a chat about on the green room maybe. But that's going on. And then if you want theory stuff, Theory Test Explained, find it on Facebook, Instagram or TikTok, or just drop me a message and we'll have a chat. If you want to help your pupils, I want to help them too. So that sounds like it's a marriage made in heaven.
And just a reminder that you will be able to watch this live, all being well, providing technology holds up. It'll be the first time we're doing it, but you'll be able to watch this live on YouTube going forward. And if you want anything else Instructor Podcast related, www.theinstructorpodcast.com. But for now, thank you for listening, and let's just keep raising standards.
The Instructor Podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.